Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leah Smalley. I'm the Assistant Director of Financial Aid Services at the Coordinating Board. Thank you so much for joining me today. I don't know how it is on the rest of Texas, but it's very rainy here in the Austin area. Just wanted to let y'all know that I'm so appreciative of all the questions that have been coming through and support from the institutions, and just working with y'all remotely has been definitely a interesting experience. I'm sure you're all going through similar circumstances at your homes and with your families. So hang in there. Hopeful that this will come to an end soon and that we can be back in the office. But as of right now, the coordinating board is still working telecommuting, and we will provide more information as it becomes available. So today I'm really going to be focusing on a bunch of different updates. And so before I get started, just as a reminder, please mute your microphone on your webcam or on your laptop or any of your devices. Please hold your questions to the very end so that way we can look at them as a group and go through those. And I'll be going through a number of topics today, so please write those down so that we don't miss them at the end when we can circle back. So let's get started. Today, again, I'm talking about updates. So first and foremost, I just wanted to give some reminders and make sure that everyone is aware of our COVID-19 information page. So I'm going to go through that briefly. And then the majority of our webcast is going to be focused on looking at program guidelines and all the updates that were made for the 2021 award year. And then lastly, just some upcoming deadlines, training updates, and some general updates from our financial aid services area. So let's get started. For those of you who didn't join last month, I did a quick presentation on our COVID-19 Updates webpage. And so this is really just a reminder that this page is available. It is, if you go to the main coordinating board website, you'll notice a link in the center of the page. And when you click on that link, an entire page dedicated to higher education and anything related to what's going on through the governor's office, through institutions, all sorts of policy updates are all located here. And as you scroll down on the page, there's a financial frequently asked questions page. And since the last month's meeting, they've actually gone through and broken them down into individual topics. So you'll notice there towards the bottom, there's tuition, refunds, and financial aid FAQs. And they've also added an update so that you know exactly when they've been done. So for example, this one was last updated on 4/27. So that's helpful because you can quickly go and see, oh, has something been updated, or no, I've seen it since then. But we are sending out clarifications and information to institutions as we get approved. So please make sure that you're checking this web page for those updates. One of the most recent updates that I wanted to share today is regarding the impact on work-study transfer restrictions. That includes the mentorship program. So about a week ago, we issued out a frequently asked questions that allows institutions to temporarily, for the 2019-20 year, transfer up to 100% of unexpended work-study or mentorship program allocated funds into their state grant program. Now, the important thing to remember on this is that it's only from work study or mentorship to the grants. It is not from grants to the work study program. So if you have funds and you have coordinated with all parties involved, because some of these programs have overlapping departments, once y'all decide that you want to move funding into once you want to move money into your program, then you'll want to send an authority transfer, which is located on the link on the webpage, or you can send us a contact us to have us help you with the process. And honestly, that's the best way to go about moving money from one program to another. That way we can talk you through all the steps, make sure that you're filling out the form correctly. So that is my recommendation, is to do the contact us to let us know that you're interested in this process. This last note here is just a reminder, like I just mentioned, that you cannot move grant money into work study beyond what's allowed statutorily, which is 10% of your allocation, or $20,000, whichever is less. So that has not changed. It's only the other way around, the work study into the grant programs. So if that's something that you're looking to do, please feel free to reach out to us. And I'm going to go through again. I think I go through this every single month on the webcast, but I'm going to do it again because we have a lot of inquiries coming through online versus on the phones these days. So let's walk through that. Just as a reminder, if you don't have your microphone on mute, I'm getting comments saying that there's some background noise. So if you can check on that, that will be helpful. And hopefully the technical issues are being resolved. I've gotten some response that there's issues with people's laptops. I apologize if you can hear me. I am recording this, so hopefully if you cannot join, then I can post the recorded version by early next week. Okay, so moving on, like I just mentioned, contact us and how to reach us operation-wise. Our customer phone lines are still unavailable. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we are working remotely, and unfortunately our phone lines are not connected. So the 3 phone lines aren't an option right now, but our contact us link is, and you can reach us 24 hours a day. You can send in any of your concerns, questions, any of those to us, and we can look and assign those out. And like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of questions coming through that have been very helpful for us to determine next steps through this pandemic. So I really encourage you, if you have a question or you have a concern, send it through Contact Us. As a reminder, when you're filling it out, it's critical that you do this step correctly. Otherwise, this goes throughout the agency and it can take a few days to reach our area. So when you're filling it out, please make sure that you mark that it's from an institution, that you include the institution's name, and under contact reason, mark financial aid question. That will make sure that it comes over to financial aid services. Within the description, please put, a detailed explanation of what your question is or your concern. That way we have that information to either route on or so we can respond appropriately. And then down in the contact information, what's really helpful right now is to include your phone number. It's not a required field, but a lot of times that helps us so we can pick up the phone and call you and ask additional questions. Okay, moving on. In the event you're not getting our notifications, like I just talked about, we post them to our webpage, but we also send them out through our listserv. So if you're new or if maybe you've been around but you're not currently getting any notifications, you'll want to go to the Stay Connected page on our Student Financial Aid Programs webpage, and you'll notice in the middle there is a listserv link. When you click on it, it opens up a form that you fill out, and once we receive that form, we will add you to our listserv, and at that point you'll receive all the notifications associated with your institution type. So if you can send that through, we'll get those processed typically within 24 to 48 hours or business days. I should say 2 business days. So moving on, the majority of this webcast is going to be focused on the 2021 program guidelines. And first and foremost, I'd like to say thank you to my team. They do an incredible job every year of researching, reviewing, editing, and trying to make these the most useful resource possible for the institutions. And when I first started at the coordinating board, they were already fantastic. They were a great resource that schools used, but we were trying each year, how can we improve them? How can we add extra? And we're going to continue that for next year as well. We have a big project on the horizon to look at these guidelines and really see how we can even make them more robust. But this webcast really is to dig in and explain some of the changes that have happened on these guidelines. So I just want to remind people, 1, make sure your phone's on mute or your microphone, and 2, as we go through the slides, it may generate some questions. If you can hold those to the end, that way, again, we can talk through those as a team, and the comments aren't distracting for those that are listening. So first and foremost, I'd like to talk about overarching updates. So these are what I call global updates. These are things that we update every year, such as program year, the award amounts and the loan totals that you'll find throughout the documents, any deadline dates, proration and calculation examples, which are only found in a few of the programs, and then the appendix has been standardized. So I'm not going to go through those in any detail because, again, those are my global updates and I don't feel like we need to go through those. So one of the biggest things that you'll notice, and this is one of the hot topics that we get every year, is selective service statements. And on last month's webcast, I talked about a change that was released partially because of COVID-19 and needing to lessen the burden on not only the institutions, but the student. And so effective April 6th, we did release that a statement is not required for selective service status when the student can be confirmed on the sss.gov website. So that is a pretty big change. I know a lot of institutions were kind of waiting and hoping that that would happen. And we did get legal confirmation that if you go online and you can print out their selective service registration off the internet, then that can suffice as their statement. So that is pretty big. So please, if you did not know that that had occurred, that was effective April 6th. The other thing was if the ICER comes through and the student is under the age of 18, that no statement is required since the ICER already acknowledges that they are exempt from registration. Once they become 18, they would in fact need to register and their ICER would need to confirm it, or if they don't complete an ICER, then obviously they would need to go through the method to confirm their status, either through the form or on the TASPA. So that's when the statement is not required. When is the statement required? The new items that we identified were if the student completes a TASPA, it's required because it's now included. So we did embed that in the TASPA, so hopefully that's been a benefit for everyone. We've gotten good feedback on that, and hopefully the students understand it as well. So the other thing that we add clarity to on this particular section was when the student doesn't complete a FAFSA or TASPA, but applies for state financial aid, such as an exemption or a waiver, and they cannot be confirmed on the website, then they would need to complete a form and any backup documentation. So that is what's new in the actual body of the selective service statement page. But the other thing you may have noticed if you've seen the new guidelines is that we went ahead and created a fillable form. It's something that I think a lot of institutions have already done on their own through a student portal, but this is for schools that maybe not have that available, something that you can post on your website. So we created one in English and Spanish. You can get it either through going through the guidelines and then downloading the form, or we've created them on our Student Financial Aid Programs webpage. You can find those under Program Resources, or you can find them on the online forms. So they're all available in those two locations. So I will keep moving. So under the grant programs, all three, so that's Texas Grant, TEOG, and TEG. Last summer in May, we released summer SAP guidance for year-round grants. And so this year in the guidelines, we added a little excerpt that just clarifies that if a student receives state grant funding in the summer, that you have to include those credits when determining their SAP. If the student does not receive state grant funding, then you can use those credits to reestablish their eligibility, but you don't have to use those credits if it's going to hurt the student in any way or they would lose their eligibility. So really, that's an important thing to understand, because while a lot of schools are not awarding summer grants, some are, and we've been getting questions, how do we go about calculating the SAP? So this was added to the guidelines to further clarify the SAP process for summer. So again, the easiest way to remember is if they get money, it counts. If they don't get money, it depends. So again, if they don't receive the money, it only counts if it's going to help the student. We don't want to, if they're already eligible for their fall, we don't want to strip them of those funds. So if they didn't receive any summer funding. So moving on with the grant programs, we did add clarification in the processing funds section. As you may be aware, the whole process on requesting grant funding has changed. So instead of the online form, there's now an online portal through our CB Pass software system. And so we went in and modified that to clarify how to request funds. So now you'll notice that we put dates in here on when you can start requesting your funding, which is August 3rd of 2020. And we will start processing the funds after September 1st of 2020, which means that the funding most likely won't hit the institution until later on that week or even the following week. It really just depends on the requests and the comptroller. The other clarification was we made sure to clarify that you have until close of business on August 1st of 2021. So you have the entire fiscal year to request those funds. And that's because, again, the reallocation process was eliminated, and so schools have the ability to request money longer and in the summer. We do have it marked as August 1st because we still have to have time to process your funds and then disperse those to the institution. It also clarifies that when you're returning funds, you have to also do that through the grant payment system, and that we highly encourage you to use electronic funds transfer to return the money from usually the business office. So it's kind of a two-step process. You have to notify us through the portal, and then you have to submit the funds through a wire or an ACH process. Okay, I'm going to highlight those. So the grants and Texas College Work-Study programs. This update that I added is in relation to the Texas Administrative Code 22.11. If you've been following some of the Financial Aid Advisory Committee or any of the topics over the past, say, 6 months, there has been a lot of realignment going on with the programs in Chapter 22. And what that means is each of the programs had very similar sections, but they weren't all the same. They had very small differences that confused a lot of people, and it made it difficult to administer these programs when really the concepts were the same. So over the past year or so, an alignment has been taking place where a lot of the concepts are moved to our general provisions section of the code. So what I'm going to go through now affects grants and work study only, but you'll notice that now in all the guidelines, there's an award adjustment section and then an over award section. So those are all in our general provisions now, and they help to identify how to handle funds if an adjustment has to be made. So the award adjustment section is clarifying that if you identify funds after a student withdraws, that you will need to go through your institution's return of funds process. If the student's disbursement exceeds his or her eligibility amount, you would need to recalculate that eligibility. And anytime you identify awards after they've been adjusted, that you can re-award those to other eligible students at the institution versus having to send them back to the coordinating board. If you cannot re-award the eligible funds to a student, then they have to be returned. And then we have that link to our timely distribution of funds section. Over awards has always been in our guidelines, but again, as you'll see as the year progresses, all of these sections are going to be moved out of the individual programs and into this general provision 22.11. So that's why we have it listed there. Late disbursements, also a section that has been in the guidelines previously, but now has been moved to our general provisions. So there really isn't a change to it. It's more of the reference to the new TAC code. And then finally, authority to transfer funds. This has been also moved to 22.11. And one of the biggest changes you'll notice is that the request to submit the authority to transfer has been moved to July 1st of 2021. In prior years, we had two separate deadlines for work study versus the grant programs, and we were able to further clarify that there only needs to be one request date. So, and you have a lot more time now to submit that. So that is a pretty big change for this particular process. And again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the webcast, we have a special exception going on for work study funds right now. And so this is a separate process that you'll want to work with financial aid services if you need to do an authority to transfer for this year. Okay, moving on. So each year we release a priority EFC, and this year we have updated that to $6,047. That was released earlier this year, and you'll notice that in the guidelines. I'll be talking about what does priority EFC really mean in just a moment. Within the Texas Grant Program, there's a couple clarifications in the eligibility section in the initial year eligibility. One of the things that we observed in the guidelines was the word accumulated was being used, and accumulated does not equate to attempted. So we updated the word to attempted to better align with the definition of entering undergrad, which is defined as a student enrolled in the first 30 semester credit hours or their equivalent. And the reason, again, we did that is we get a lot of questions, scenarios from institutions asking, well, is it attempted or is it accumulated? Did they have to earn those credits? So we did clarify that in not only this program, but you'll see in the TEOG program as well. The other thing in this section that has been updated is the information in the high school pathway and then also the associate degree pathway. We noticed that we were getting questions on when the student is eligible, at what date does their eligibility end. And if you go into the rule, it specifically says prior to the end of the 16th month, prior to the end of the 12th month, that kind of thing. So we added that into the guidelines to add additional clarity for these pathways. And we are also looking at all the pathway language right now just to make sure that if there's any opportunity to make them clear, we're going to be doing that in the next few months. Also on Texas Grant, on the priority model section, one of the very subtle changes that we made was to the second bullet here. We did get questions asking, well, the recommended program is not there anymore. How come it's in there? But what the rule says is that they have to be in the recommended, advanced, or equivalent. So we simply changed it to complete the equivalent of the recommended program. So that way schools know the recommended is no longer available, but it's the equivalent, which should be up to your admissions department to determine, or the high school should be able to communicate if they met that. But if not, we went ahead this year and provided TEA's website and a graduation program side by side down at the bottom. When you click on that, it will show you the old recommended program and what that entailed, and then you can see how the student would meet the equivalent version of that in today's environment. So moving on, this is one of the more complex updates that occurred and has been going around for probably a year now. And this came up because institutions have asked over and over, how do we prioritize students for Texas Grant? And so we wanted to make sure that we addressed that. And I think that we did that well, but I'm going to talk through it a little bit today and see if I can add some additional information or maybe paint a picture better for everyone. So the way that the statutes are written, there's three main priorities that are written for Texas Grant. The first one is priority EFC, which I mentioned just a moment ago. And then there's priority model, which I just talked about, that TEA posts the different programs. And then there's priority deadline. So when you read all of the priorities in the statute, it can get very, very confusing. It kind of takes you in a bunch of circles. Our team has done a lot of research, worked with our legal team extensively. And what we did is in the guidelines, we tried to add several layers of explanation to help guide the institutions. So in the awarding section now, we broke it down kind of into two main buckets. This is not a change for renewal year students, but we wanted to make absolutely certain that schools understand that precedence does go to eligible renewal students over initial year students. So you should be focusing all of your funding on renewals first and foremost. Assuming you have more money, which many schools do, then you have to decide, well, which initial year students are going to get those funds. When you look at the statutory intent and how the legislature wrote Texas Grant, they focused on two main priorities, which are priority EFC, which is found under 56303E. And then they had priority model, which they added later, which is section 56303F. So the way to look at priority in awarding is that you first and foremost need to identify all of your students that meet the priority EFC. That is your first bucket of students. But in the statute, they wrote that the highest priority out of that bucket needs to be given to those that meet priority model. So you'll take your main bucket of students, and out of those, the priority model are given the highest precedence. Of the remaining applicants that don't meet priority model, but they end up meeting the priority EFC, so those are the leftover students that still have high need, those are the ones that are given the next kind of allotment of funds. The priority deadline is a separate statute that is overarching on all financial aid programs, but it's not written specifically into the Texas Grant Program. So that can be used to evaluate students in similar situations so that you can determine which student would get those funds. Again, there's a lot of different scenarios at different institutions that have multiple populations. We've got some institutions that have a lot of priority model students and others that hardly have any. So really at the end of the day, it's acknowledging the statutory intent, making sure that you're prioritizing them the best way you can using this guidance. And then if you have questions on your particular school, then you would want to reach out to us and we can do our best to provide some clarity on how to award your students. And we do get those questions all the time, so feel free to send those through to us. Another thing that was added was 2 examples, because this is kind of a complicated situation to understand these different buckets. So the first example was you have 2 initial year students, both meet priority EFC and both are priority model. And so because they're similarly situated, you would then use the priority deadline to determine who would get those funds. The student who met the deadline should be given priority over the student who did not. In the second example, you have 1 student who meets the priority EFC and the priority model but didn't meet the deadline. The second student meets the deadline and the model but doesn't meet the priority EFC. These 2 applicants are not similarly situated, so you would need to look again at the legislative intent. And in this situation, the first student met the 2 main priorities that the government decided to implement, and thus that would take precedence over the student who didn't meet the priority EFC. So I hope that that clarifies. Again, please hold your questions to the end and we can go through those if you have specific ones related to Texas Grant. So moving on with TEOG, like I mentioned before, we did update the word accumulated to attempted, same way as we did with Texas Grant. TEG, we added a section that addresses ministry-related degrees. This clarifies that whether the student has their sole major, a second major, a minor, any part of their degree plan, they would be ineligible for TEG if it's ministry related. If the TEG recipient adds the major, it's not easy to determine. You can't split apart the money so half of it goes to one program or the other. The student is simply ineligible. So if you identify that this is the case for one of your students, you would need to determine when it was added and then determine when the funding became ineligible. Also for TEG guidelines, the tuition differential section, you'll notice that there is no chart this year, and that is temporary until we receive the college student budget information and we can collect all the tuition rates, because we have to do formulas to determine those to place in those tables. So as of right now, they are not there, but we'll be going back in the coming months and we will update those guidelines and send out a notification. There was also an appendix that was included, and that has also been updated so that we will make sure that the updated tuition totals are included in any of the examples and calculations. So moving on, Texas College WorkStudy Updates. The awarding section, you'll notice that there's a new alert. I think this will also make people very happy that the off-campus position requirement was repealed. That was section 56.076B. It required institutions to ensure at least 20%, but no more than 50% of their employment positions were off campus, and that has been eliminated. So that is gone. So we wanted to make sure people were aware. And then summer awards, this is more of a reminder. We get this question often, but Texas College WorkStudy, as of right now, you cannot use those funds for summer employment unless funds are reallocated. And at this point, we have not reallocated summer funds since I have started at the coordinating board. So it's just making sure you understand that concept that if we do a reallocation, you can use them for summer. If not, then you would need to return those funds at the end of the spring semester. Or again, you can request that any leftover funds be transferred over to your grant program. So that's what that clarification is there. Educational aid updates. We updated the teacher shortage areas. Luckily, nothing changed this year. They were really, really fast at updating the shortage areas through the Department of Education and through TEA. So those are now available in the guidelines. Another big update in the guidelines, although it didn't change the information, the flow of the document changed because now we've added a continuation of eligibility, we've added a discontinuation of eligibility, and we added a hardship provision section. Each of these sections better aligns with the other exemption and waiver programs we released in January. And so we wanted to make sure that all of the documents communicated the same thing for exemption and waivers. So this is stating that in order to continue receiving educational aid from semester to semester, they do have to be meeting the institution SAP. They cannot have exceeded the undergraduate hours for excessive hours, and that there is a hardship provision that institutions are required to have. That differs from some of the other programs where it's optional to have a hardship provision. Educational aid exemption, it's a requirement. So if you participate in this program, please make sure that you read through this and that you have that procedure in place for your students that may qualify for a hardship. Educational aid awarding section, we have added institutional FAQs and student FAQs. These are resources that we've always produced, but we realized that they were kind of hidden in the world. They were not kind of right out there for institutions to download. So we put them instead right here in the awarding section. You will notice that when you click on them right now, they do say coming soon. And that's because we're waiting for the allocations to be finalized before we distribute those. But as soon as they are finalized, those documents will, when you click on them, they will pop up. So if you go on there today and you're like, wait a minute, they don't work, that's because it's intentional. So please hold tight. Educational aid is on the radar. We are working on it and we were getting it out soon. The other thing on educational aid that we get a lot of questions on is regarding the match and how to work the match. There is a requirement that at least 10% of each recipient's exemption be matched with institutional funds. What we have seen more and more is higher percentages, which allows schools to stretch their money further. So we wanted to make sure to highlight that here in the guidelines so you know that you can do that. So we have some schools doing well beyond 10%. Again, this allows them to give more of these exemptions to more students. So in these examples, you've got 10%, 20%, and 30%, and then we show the institutional match and then ultimately the award amount. So those were added, again, to kind of conceptualize how to do the match. College access loan awarding was updated. We get all the time questions on Cal and who qualifies for Cal and how do we subtract aid from Cal. So we decided this year to make sure that it was much more obvious on how to do a college access loan calculation. So within the awarding section, one, we clarified with a note at the bottom that says that even if you don't participate in the direct loans program, you do have to subtract out the federal aid that the student may qualify for, regardless of whether the student actually accepts the aid. So that's been included. And then we've also added 2 examples to the awarding section. One talks about TASFA filers. We often get questions, can a TASFA student apply for a CAL? And the answer is yes, they can apply as long as they have a cosigner that qualifies for the loan. They can cosign on the loan. But then the follow-up question always is, well, how much do we deduct? Because they're not eligible for Title IV. So how would we do that? And that is absolutely correct, that they don't have to, the institution doesn't have to deduct the Title IV eligibility since they wouldn't qualify. So I hope that clarifies for TASFA students on the 2 questions. 1, yes, they can do it if they have an eligible cosigner, and 2, no, you don't have to deduct Title IV eligibility for these students. The other one was for students who choose not to file a FAFSA. So these are students that could qualify and they don't do a FAFSA. They can borrow a CAL loan as long as they're eligible or they have an eligible cosigner. But for these students, you do have to deduct the amount of direct loans that they would be eligible for. If you do not know their dependency status, we have included in the guidelines that you can use dependent can be used as the default, but you can use your records and you can kind of, for many students, you can decipher if they're dependent or independent. For those that you cannot, you can simply use dependent. But I think this really helps because, again, we get these questions almost weekly, like how do we handle these particular scenarios? So I hope you feel that they're helpful as well. Lastly, on CAL, the student loan debt letter section, there was a minor change that's coming in the rule, which is 21.49. I do not believe it's been posted in the code just yet, but the second bullet you'll notice it has changed from last year, and it was to clarify that for state education loans that you only need to include the ones that were taken out at your institution. We are not requiring that institutions try and figure out all the different state loan programs that the student may have borrowed at other schools. Even though it's available, it's not easy to access, and therefore it becomes a pretty big burden on the institution. So that's what this bullet is trying to re-communicate, is that it would only be state education loans at the current institution on the education debt letter. Texas Armed Services Scholarship Program is the biggest update of the guidelines that we did this year. We did a comprehensive, every section was updated. So my note here is please review all sections of the guidelines. If you participate in this program, or if you're interested in understanding the program, please read it cover to cover. It's very difficult for me to point out every word and every change because, like I said, there were so many changes to this document that it was kind of tricky on this webcast to really communicate what it was. So I'm going to do my best. But first and foremost, one of the bigger changes was that we first had an initial eligibility and then a continuing eligibility. That concept has been eliminated. There's only one eligibility. It's to get the scholarship, the appointed student must meet the following. So these are the requirements now: is meet selective service. They have to be enrolled in a ROTC program or another undergraduate officer commissioning program, and they have to maintain SAP. So even if they are just getting it for the first time and they're a junior, they have to be meeting SAP. And this is the biggest change this year, is that the SAP is now based on institutions' financial aid SAP. It's no longer a state program SAP. If you've been doing TASP for a while, you may know that originally it was an institutional SAP. Then about a year and a half to 2 years ago, it changed so that the student had to meet the state's program SAP requirement. It has now changed back to the institution's program SAP. So that is something I wanted to make people aware of, that you no longer are tracking the state's program SAP. It would be based on your school. And lastly, the student would need to enter into a written agreement with the coordinating board. originally the way this was written in the rule was there was a whole lot of requirements, and now they have created an entire section dedicated to the promissory note. So while the language in here has not changed, it has been given its own dedicated section so it doesn't get kind of muddled in the eligibility section because it's kind of its own thing. So the promissory note section just clarifies exactly what the recipient is agreeing to so that they know that if they don't meet all of these requirements, that they will have their scholarship converted to a loan. The other thing that is changed is the clarification on how many awards a student can receive. So previously it just said 4 of the 6. Now it says 4 of the 6 that are allowed for a student to graduate from a degree plan of 4 years or less. They've also added if the degree plan is 4 years or more, that they have 5 of the 6 years allowed for graduation. So again, that's a big change because there's different degree plans. We wanted to acknowledge that it takes them longer, and therefore that's been updated in this part of the guidelines. The conversion of a scholarship to a loan, this entire section has been rewritten. So again, I would encourage you to read all of it because I could read every bullet to you, but that would take us a long time. I want to make sure that we get to the questions, and I still have a little bit more to go. So please take the time to compare last year's to this one if you want to see verbatim what the changes were. But most notably, this down at the bottom, it did not change, but it's very important to understand for TASC that if a scholarship is converted to a loan, meaning they lost their eligibility, the student cannot regain eligibility in a subsequent year. It's gone. And they've lost any opportunity to get one in the future. So that's a pretty big deal. So it's important if you're counseling these students that they understand not only their commitment, but what their academic standards are so that they don't lose their future scholarships and so that their scholarship does not get converted to a loan. The loan repayment section, the verbiage didn't really change. We did clean up how it's formatted so that it's easier to read. But in the notes section, it talks about medical disability and financial hardship. And one of the things that they did change in the rule is that this can be submitted by the student verbally. So if they call the coordinating board, we can process that over the phone versus in writing. So that's a pretty big change as well. That's really it for TASP. Again, please go back, read it cover to cover. If you have questions, reach out. The code has not yet been updated with these changes. They were approved, but they're not on the register. I checked this morning, and unfortunately, they're still not there. But if you have questions, we'd be happy to answer those, and I can do additional training if we feel like there's some opportunity there. This next part of my webcast is a little activity. I've never done this before, but we are looking at the comprehensive guidelines, and some of you may be like, wait a minute, what? There's a comprehensive guidelines? What does that even mean? Each year we take all of the published guidelines and we merge them into one big document. So it's just everything all smushed together. So we publish those each year, but we're not really sure if schools use that version or if you primarily go out and get the one that you need, which are located under program resources. You'll notice in this red box, we post them like kind of down in the middle of the screen, but we don't have any way to gauge whether or not they're useful. So we're going to play a little game. Hopefully y'all are still on with me. And it says, do you use the comprehensive program guidelines? So in your chat box, if you can either answer yes, I use them, answer 1, just type a 1. If you do not, you don't use the comprehensive version, type 2. And if y'all can do that now, I'm going to move forward, but that will give me at least somewhat of a gauge so we can determine if we need to continue to produce the comprehensive or if we can just do the individual guidelines. I see lots of flashing, so that's good. Okay, moving on. Deadline reminders. We have today is a deadline reminder for the COVID-19. It's called a survey, but really we're seeking information for schools to submit COVID-19 pages or resources you have on your website. If you can email those to our FAS operations inbox, the email is right there on the screen. The deadline is today, but we're trying to collect those so that we can pass those on to the public so that they know where to find information related to your institution. Just a reminder that the deadline for college student budgets was extended to June 1st, which is coming up very quickly. April 15th deadline for the tuition equalization grant engagement report for 2018-19 was extended to June 30th. So you have that extra time. And then just a reminder that net price calculator is delayed because of college student budgets. And so we will be releasing the rollover and all the information in the summer and closer to September. So keep an eye out for that. Just some training updates. If you did not see, TASFA announced that new aid officer workshop was canceled because of, again, the COVID-19 circumstances. Also, the fall conference and ABC conference, which the coordinating board presents at all of these each year, has been canceled. But the monthly webcast is still going strong. I hope that, again, these are very useful. Our next one is coming up actually pretty quick on June 9th, which is a Tuesday at 2. And so I will be going through the following updates below. I'll be going through if there's any allocation information I can provide. I'll be going through our new foster care fact sheet, which is going to be released this week. I'll be discussing bilingual education program guidelines, which only affects 7 schools, but we will be going through those just briefly so that you know what information is available for that program. And then WorkStudy mentorship program guidelines. Those were updated this year. I want to make sure and go through those. They were not released with our other ones. So this is a good opportunity to circle back. And I may even have someone from that area on the webcast with me if I can do that. It depends on if we're still home or not. So stay tuned for that. I believe that's all I have. I think I need to go back to the poll. See, let me go back to my poll. I don't know if I got enough answers. If you didn't answer the poll, if you can go back and add your 1 for yes, you use them, 2, no, you don't. That would be helpful. Again, I'd hate to put this on the chopping block and then people are like, oh my gosh, we love those things. They're so wonderful. Or like, what are you talking about? We don't use those at all. It's not necessary. So again, we want to make sure we don't eliminate things that are useful. But again, if we can use that time for other resources, we will absolutely do that. Okay. That is all I have. I can just scroll back through these real quick, but I'm going to stop there. That is the end of my webcast. So I'm going to circle back and see what questions you have. If you want to start typing, we have about 9 minutes left, and that way we can see how I can help. I'm going to scroll up through here. Okay. Let's see what questions. I'm going to go back to the beginning, so I will try and let's see. I see there's lots of trouble with audio, so I hope that my recording is okay. Looks like there's some delays. Okay, here's our first question from Ed. If we transfer WorkStudy to grant, does that money need to be spent in the same year? I believe, and Deshay can chime in, but I believe once you transfer the money, if you don't use that, because we're in the first year of the biennium, those funds will be transferred forward into your next year's allocation. And I will confirm that with Deshay. She'll probably chime in just a minute. Oh, she already did. They do not have to be spent in the same year. So yes. Okay. Let's see, check presentation. Sorry guys, I'm just scrolling through here. I'm so sorry there were so many technical issues. Let's see. So I see lots of ones and twos. I'll go through and kind of tally them up. The fact that there's so many ones probably means we will keep them. So thank you for participating in my little fun game. Got a few I didn't even know they existed. So now you know they're there. We have not produced the comprehensive yet. I wanted to gauge that before we spent the time to pull that together. So let's see. I saw some questions at the very end here. Okay. For clarity purposes, if I have funds from 2020, when do they need to be spent? So I think we just answered that. Once you transfer those over, we can issue them out to you. If not, then we will look at moving those over to next year's allocation. If the institution transfers funds from mentorship to Texas grant, is there still a 10% match on those funds? I don't think anything changed for the match. You're still required to do the match. I will let you know that there's a variety of questions in the COVID-19 pipeline, and I call it the COVID-19 pipeline because they're related to different situations that have been reported from students and from schools. Those include things like matching funds and different things related to document collection and whatnot. So as we get those, again, we'll be sending those out to institutions. Please stay tuned. We're trying to do as many things to relieve burden on people as possible. Let's see. James says training is coming soon. How soon? I don't quite know what the training's in reference to, James, if you want to clarify. We do have some things that will say coming soon. That means to check back because we're going to update that link as soon as it's available. AJ is asking, is there an update on the Cal reports? Still on target to access them during the summer? Yes, we are in the testing phase this week. We're wrapping that up, and then as soon as they're out, we'll be notifying institutions, and then I'll either be doing training through a webcast, like a monthly webcast, or a dedicated webcast. We may also look into doing like a recorded version, kind of like we did when HelmNet was first launched, but yes, they are on track, AJ. Until then, please continue to submit like you always do, but stay tuned. Let's see, Roma is asking, will there be a webcast on upcoming updates on the WorkStudy mentorship guidelines? Yes, so next month I'll be going through the mentorship guidelines. We are hoping to distribute those either this week or next, so you should be getting a copy of those shortly. James said new financial aid administrators. So new aid officer workshop was canceled through TASFA. The coordinating board doesn't currently have a training available, but something we've discussed is creating some kind of new financial aid orientation type thing so that you can understand the programs better. So we do have that on our radar. We don't have anything available just yet. So again, we will try and do that soon. Deshay says, send your questions. Okay, any more questions? I have 4 minutes left. All right, well, I appreciate y'all joining. Again, if you have specific questions, Shelly's asking a question. Shelly, I may want to touch base with you offline just because it looks like that might be a discussion where we can go through it one-on-one. Let's see, Norma, if TEOG funds allocated or not spent, can those be forwarded to 2021? So because we're in the first year of the biennium, funds that have not been spent for the grant programs are moved forward to next year's program. So I hope that answers your question, Norma. So yes, if they're not spent, you'll be moving those forward. All right, well, y'all have a wonderful week. I hope y'all will join next month. We'll have some good stuff going on. Again, you're very much appreciated. Please hang in there, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.